early 1940s, an angry new style emerged, largely unnoticed at first, but destined to exert great influence on the future of jazz. The new music, called bebop or bop, began as a revolt by a few virtuosic black musicians against the domestication of jazz by the swing bands of the 1930s. Like much of the concert music of the 1940s and later, bebop was performed by a small ensemble of virtuoso musicians. The music consisted of stark, clear, technically demanding instrumental lines. The angular melodies moved by large, unpredictable leaps instead of narrow steps, and the solos were so rapid fire that they were too fast to dance to and almost too fast to listen. Rather than following prearranged or familiar harmonic progressions, bop musicians challenged one another to chart new harmonic paths and make them work. Their chords, large and richly dissonant, startled ears accustomed to tame, consistently pleasant sounds. Further, they sometimes improvised on the harmony of a famous tune rather than on the melody, which remained obscure to puzzled listeners. The best bebop musicians, in fact, achieved a revolutionary sound that effectively changed the course of jazz. The typical bebop combo consisted of trumpet and saxophone, double bass, piano, and percussion. The melody instruments, trumpet and sax, sometimes began a composition by playing a pop, blues, or original melody in unison, then alternating with increasingly complex improvisations while supported by the other players. The double bass, which marked the beat, sometimes took melodic responsibility as well in the walking bass pattern inherited from the swing era, while the piano and percussion supplied unexpected, irregular accents. A saxophonist who died young and a trumpet player who remained active until shortly before his death at 76 were among the innovators and outstanding exponents of bebop. As a youngster in Kansas City, Missouri, Charlie Parker absorbed the sounds of Lester Young, Count Basie, and other outstanding jazz musicians active there. Later, Parker moved to New York City, where he jammed at Harlem's clubs with pianist Thelonious Monk and trumpeter Dizzy Gillespie, inspiring and inspired by them to develop the complex new music. Not only was Parker an amazing saxophone virtuoso, his saxophone dry and biting, and his melodies highly jagged in contour, but he also introduced new rhythmic, melodic, and improvisational techniques that lifted jazz to a different plane. Addicted to drugs and alcohol and ill for much of his short life, Parker, whom some consider the most influential of all jazz musicians, died when he was only 34. In 1988, the movie Bird brought the story of Charlie Parker to popular attention, but among serious jazz aficionados, his memory and influence have never faded. Dizzy Gillespie improvised rhythms of a complexity unprecedented in Western culture, reaching notes no one knew the trumpet could play, and devised harmonic changes defying the accepted rules of harmony. But even more important, his music touched the human spirit with passion and beauty. Gillespie remained an active performer until shortly before his death, his famous balloon sheiks highly visible on television programs and in concerts all around the world. Parker and Gillespie's performance of Coco demonstrates the incredible virtuosity, musicianship, and compatibility of these outstanding musicians. Bebop continues to be the core element of the language of jazz. It informs the work of most contemporary players, and many stylistic and technical innovations created in the 1940s remain integral parts of jazz education. Bebop marked the ascendance of the small combo as the basic performing unit of jazz, which remains the case today, and its production and reception transformed the meanings associated with jazz and its place in American culture. Bebop also gave jazz unprecedented capital as art music and signified its move into its current, albeit precarious, position at the intersection of high art and popular culture. In recent years, bebop has become a test case for rethinking jazz history. Much writing about jazz presents the music as a self-contained progression of styles that are divorced from their social context. Consequently, some write about bebop as if it is merely another chapter in the aesthetic development of the idiom. Others pay closer attention to social context and, in so doing, describe bebop as a cohesive aesthetic movement with a seamlessness between the formal qualities of the genre and the ideological orientations and social positions of musicians and their audience. Such narratives explain how bebop mirrored transformations in Black life, attitudes, and politics in the crucible of urban America during World War II. By creating a new music, adapting a renegade style, asserting their intelligence, and demanding to be treated as artists, young African American musicians forged a cultural politics that challenged all at once the banality of popular swing music, the complacency of older musicians, and a system of economic exploitation and cultural expropriation by whites in the music business. In doing so, they helped forge a subculture that distanced itself from and challenged the mainstream. Bebop is an important music, which not only challenged and stimulated talented musicians and conscientious listeners, but also ushered in the age of modern jazz. Meant for listening more than dancing, bebop had significant implications for musicians interested in establishing relationships between concert music and jazz.